They said the Dakota wind could strip flesh from bone, but what it stripped that February night was the truth itself. The file you're about to hear from was sealed for 40 years, buried so deep in territorial archives that even its catalog number was erased. Inside, the pages whisper a name like a curse: Henrik Olsen. Before we begin, take a breath. What you're about to hear isn't folklore. It's the kind of history that men with titles decided the world wasn't ready for. February 14th, 1889. 24 settlers set out from Fort Buford, chasing the promise of free land and fresh starts. By the third sunrise, only one stumbled back, half frozen, half mad, clutching a pouch of gold that wasn't his. The survivor said wolves took them. The record agreed. But the prairie remembers differently. Imagine the wind carving through that endless white, the horizon erased, sound itself swallowed. Somewhere in that void, 23 souls vanished, and one man came home a hero. The witnesses are gone, the evidence redacted. Yet fragments remain, a leather strap too clean to be weathered, an axe blade sharpened from the wrong side, and a journal entry written in two different hands. History calls it the Devil's March. But the devil in this story didn't come howling from the blizzard. He walked among them, leading the way. And if you listen closely tonight, when the wind rises against your windows, you may still hear the echo of wagon wheels turning over frozen ground, a sound that once meant hope and ended in hunger. Before we descend further into this darkness, make sure you're part of it with us. Like this video. Share it so the record can't be buried again. And subscribe to Fear Liturgy, where the forgotten are remembered and the lost finally speak. Because what happened to those families in the winter of 1889 wasn't just a tragedy, it was a design. And the man who engineered it left behind a pattern that still repeats, quietly, invisibly, in every system built on trust. The Dakota Territory of 1889 looked pure from a distance. White fields of snow, sunlight scattering like glass across the frozen plains, but purity is only the color things take before they rot. Behind every wagon wheel and prayer for spring lay hunger, debt, and the quiet panic of people who'd gambled everything on a map they barely understood. Henrik Olsen understood it, or thought he did. He'd crossed oceans chasing the same promise of free land, learned to read weather like scripture and people like open ledgers. He knew which settlers carried gold stitched into their hems, and which men would rather die than admit they'd lost their way. He smiled easily, spoke little, and measured trust the way a butcher measures weight precisely, without sentiment. The archives say he volunteered to guide 6 families west. What they don't say is how often he'd already ridden those trails alone, leaving small markers cuts on birch bark, stones stacked in impossible balance, as if mapping something no one else could see. Witnesses later claimed that before dawn on the day they departed, he stood outside the trading post for nearly an hour, watching the eastern sky and whispering words no one recognized. Some said it was a prayer, others, a bargain. When he led the wagons from Fort Buford, the snow was thin and crisp beneath the wheels, the air too still for February. He pointed out constellations, told jokes in his broken English, and promised the shortcut he knew would save 2 days of travel. The families believed him. They always believed the man who looked like he'd never felt the cold. By the second night, the moon vanished behind low clouds. Tracks filled in within minutes. A silence fell so heavy that even the horses stopped snorting steam. It was there among the flicker of dying campfires that the first unease took root, the sense that they were being guided not through the wilderness, but into it. Later investigators would call it coincidence. Survivors, if you can call the one who returned a survivor, called it design. A pattern repeating itself. Trust offered, trust consumed, trust erased. The frontier wasn't a place. It was a mirror, and Henrik Olsen's reflection was the first crack. The storm came on a whisper. It began with a stillness so complete that sound itself seemed to hide, as if the prairie were holding its breath. By dusk, the light had turned the color of iron. Henrik said it was nothing, just wind off the Missouri. but every child in those wagons went quiet. Even the oxen lifted their heads and stared into the dark. Then the wind struck. Snow flew sideways, hard as gravel, slicing through canvas and skin alike. The wagons groaned, their wheels half buried before anyone could shout a command. In the chaos, Henrik's voice cut through calm, certain, absolute. Circle the wagons. There's shelter ahead. No one questioned him. They followed his lantern through a corridor of drifting white until canyon walls rose on either side. Relief washed through the group until they realized the canyon funneled the wind straight down upon them. Fires refused to burn. Frost crept inside blankets. Every breath turned to knives. Through that first night, Olsen moved like a machine built for the cold. He tended flames that others couldn't keep lit, produced rations that no one had seen before, and claimed to know exactly how long the storm would last. To some, he was salvation. To others, an enigma too composed for the circumstances. Dr. Hartwell, young physician, noted in his journal that Olsen never slept. Each time the doctor woke to check on his pregnant wife, he saw their guide standing alone at the canyon mouth, lantern lowered, staring into the blizzard, as though waiting for something to appear. By the second day, fear changed flavor. It wasn't the storm they dreaded, it was each other. Rations dwindled. Tempers snapped. Small arguments over firewood turned to accusations whispered through chapped lips. And still, Henrik smiled that placid, unreadable smile. When the third night fell, and the wind screamed like steel through the ravine, young Michael Brennan swore he saw shapes moving at the canyon rim men. Not wolves bent against the gale, vanishing when he shouted. Henrik said it was fever. But the boy's father noticed something else. Fresh footprints near the wagons, pressed deep, facing inward. In the morning, 2 barrels of provisions were missing. The doctor confronted Olsen. Henrik's answer was simple, almost tender. The prairie takes what it's owed. No one spoke after that. Out there, among the white graves of the Badlands, trust began to thaw first, and then it froze solid again, harder than ice, until nothing human could move beneath it. Dawn never really came, only a dull gray that made the snow glow from within, as if the land itself had gone blind. The families waited for the sun that refused to rise. Breath froze on beards, lashes, the canvas walls of wagons that sagged like exhausted lungs. When they counted the barrels, the truth set in. Food enough for 2 days, maybe less. Henrik said nothing at first. He moved between wagons, checking harnesses, stacking firewood with that same mechanical grace. When Thomas Bergstrom asked where the missing provisions had gone, Henrik looked up slowly, eyes pale as river ice. "Gone?" he repeated, as though tasting the word. "The storm scatters everything. We salvage what remains." But Michael Brennan wasn't convinced. He'd been awake when the wind lulled for an hour just before dawn. He'd seen a lantern moving near the supply sled, steady and deliberate, while every other flame fought for breath. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. His father's hand on his arm warned him to wait. By noon, the storm's voice changed pitch. The canyon had become a throat. They were caught inside it. Dr. Hartwell urged Henrik to lead them out while there was still light, but the guide refused. "If you move now, you die," he said, calm as prayer. "Stay, and the storm dies instead." It sounded almost holy, and for another day they obeyed. That night, the doctor's wife went into labor weeks early. Screams tore through the wind. The sound was unbearable. Henrik stood just outside the wagon, silent, hands clasped behind his back, as if counting the seconds between cries. When the noise stopped, he whispered something in Norwegian that no one else understood. The next morning, the doctor buried a bundle in the snow. After that, the others stopped looking to Henrik for guidance. They watched him. Every move, every word. And still, he smiled, as if he alone could see the path that would save them. In the official record, this is the moment marked as growing tension within the party. But the survivors, those who found fragments later, called it what it was, the first fracture of faith. The prairie had turned its face away. and the man who promised safe passage had already chosen who would see spring. By the 5th day, the canyon was silent in a way no storm could explain. The wind had dropped, but sound seemed afraid to return. What replaced it was the creak of frozen leather, the rasp of coughing, and the dull scrape of shovels against packed snow. Every motion echoed like confession. The families tried to pack what they could. The plan was simple: follow the canyon's length until it opened east. But when they reached the bend, they found walls higher than before and tracks that led nowhere, only back toward their own camp. Someone had led them in circles. Thomas Bergstrom confronted Henrik first. "You said there was a pass," he shouted, voice cracking from cold. "You swore by God there was a pass." Henrik didn't raise his voice. "There was," he said, "until you questioned it." The answer made no sense, but it landed with weight. The others murmured, half believing, half terrified. He spoke with the certainty of a man who had already decided the outcome. That evening, the doctor found fresh boot prints again, smaller this time, weaving among the wagons, circling his own before disappearing into drifts. He counted the supplies and realized what no one else wanted to admit. The food hadn't been stolen all at once. It was being taken slowly, measured out night by night, as if rationed for someone else's journey. When he told the group, a kind of quiet panic spread, too cold for shouting, too tired for fight. They sat around the last fire, eyes fixed on Henrik's back, while he stood watching the stars. Finally, Michael Brennan spoke what they all feared. "He's not lost. He's leaving us behind." Henrik turned then, expression unreadable, and said only, "Some paths are meant for one pair of feet." Then he walked into the dark lantern swinging, flame shrinking to a pin of gold before vanishing entirely. No one followed. They waited through the night, expecting to hear his voice calling them to move, to hope, to believe again. But morning brought only tracks leading away, steady, deliberate, and a silence heavy enough to press the air from their lungs. The official record ends that day. But fragments of a journal found near the Missouri months later suggest that Henrik Olsen did reach open ground. Whether he survived the thaw, no one knows. What remained in the canyon were 23 names, and a question that outlived them all. When salvation walks away, who do we become? The official record ends neatly. But history never ends neatly, does it? When the snow melted that spring and the Missouri swelled with the thaw, a deputy named Alistair Crane returned to that canyon. He wasn't supposed to. His orders were to leave the site buried, out of respect for the dead. But Crane had fought through to winters beside men who lied as easily as they breathed. And he recognized the smell of a cover-up. What he found wasn't decay. It was structure, a pattern. Under the frozen mud, he unearthed not the scattered chaos of a desperate camp, but a circle. 23 shallow impressions, perfectly spaced, as if the families had been arranged rather than fallen. At the center, a blackened stake and the remnants of burned rope. Someone had bound something there. Someone who wanted witnesses. Crane took a charcoal rubbing of the site and delivered it to the marshal's office. Within 48 hours, he was transferred east. His report filed, sealed, and forgotten. But the rubbing survived, folded inside an envelope that never reached its destination. It surfaced decades later in a private collection of territorial artifacts auctioned in Chicago. And if you trace the pattern, overlay it on a map of the Dakota Badlands, it aligns not with the site of the supposed tragedy, but with an older grid, one carved into buffalo stones centuries before the first settlers arrived. The Lakota called it the mouth of the earth, a place where spirits entered the world of men. You were told Olsen was a murderer, but what if he was a messenger? What if he didn't lure them there for gold, but for offering? Because in his journal, one page preserved by the same collector, he wrote only 7 words before the ink froze mid-stroke. They promised warmth for what I bring. If you're still listening, you've crossed the line most men never see. This is where history bends into something older, colder, hungrier. Comment below with the phrase, "I see the pattern twice," if you feel it too. It marks you as one who notices what others ignore. Because this isn't just about Olsen. It's about every man who thinks he's the master of his fate, till he realizes the deal was written long before he was born. When a man kills, it's a tragedy. When an institution hides the killing, it becomes policy. Weeks after Alistair Crane's forced transfer, the Dakota Territorial Office quietly issued a correction to its reports, claiming all remaining evidence had been lost to spring flooding. But the Missouri that year ran low, calm, and glassy. Every trapper along its banks knew that. So who gave the order to rewrite nature itself? Inside the archives, the Olsen file vanished from public record, but one sheet survived in a private folder marked Territorial Transitions. On it, 3 names appear in faint pencil: Judge William Hartfield, Major Silas Trout, and a symbol, a triangle of interlocking lines identical to one later used by a short-lived organization called a Dominion Society. Officially, the Dominion were agricultural surveyors. Unofficially, they were a network of early land speculators tied to banks in New York and London. Their interest wasn't crops. It was land corridors and visible boundaries that would determine which railroad, and therefore which empire, controlled the new states rising from the prairie. The tragedy of Henrik Olsen, with its 23 missing settlers, conveniently cleared 120 square miles of claimable land along the Missouri's edge. You see the pattern now, don't you? The storm, the massacre, the cover-up, all of it served a function. Olsen wasn't simply evil. He was useful, disposable, the perfect phantom to bury a corporate cleansing under. And when the storm came, they let it come. Because a blizzard erases footprints, but it also erases witnesses. There's a reason you were never taught this in school. History is not a story of what happened. It's a story of what was allowed to remain. Every ledger, every map, every heroic pioneer tale was an act of editing, a ritual of forgetting. And in that forgetting, power thrives. They didn't just erase Olsen's victims. They erased the boundary between man and the machine that consumes him. Because once a government learns it can feed the land with its own citizens, it never stops. Power never dies. It adapts. The Dominion Society dissolved before 1902, at least on paper. But ideas like theirs never vanish. They migrate. Every century invents a new vocabulary for control. In the 1800s, it was land and law. In the 1900s, it became propaganda and policy. Today, it's data and distraction. The face changes, the mechanism remains. Crane's journals, the ones his family hid for decades, end with a single line written in a trembling hand. They built the system to remember what the people forgot. It reads like paranoia until you realize what he meant. Each generation writes its history on a different surface parchment. Celluloid, silicon, but the same pressure shapes every story. Those who own the narrative own the minds that believe it. When we study Olsen's case, we aren't just staring into the past. We're looking into a mirror that never ages. The question is not how could this happen? The question is, what version of it is happening now, unseen? That's the heart of forbidden history, not demonic cults or hidden cabals, but the quiet agreement of ordinary men to look away when truth costs too much. The machinery of control is psychological first, bureaucratic second. Every signature, every unspoken order, every silence becomes a gear in the same device. If you've watched this far, you already feel that pull, the sense that something ancient moves behind the curtain of everyday life. It's not superstition, it's awareness. And now to seal it. Write this phrase in the comments: I remember the forgotten. Do it twice. Not for an algorithm, but as a promise to yourself that you will not look away. Because remembrance is rebellion. And rebellion, once awakened, does not die. To remember is to carry a weight most men cannot bear. The prairie swallowed 23 lives, and in the same instant, it swallowed the easy story of heroism and survival. But those who remember the survivors, the witnesses, the ones who uncover the patterns, carry something heavier. The knowledge that the world is always curated, always edited. Henrik Olsen returned alone, carrying gold and silence. He was hailed as a hero, but in truth, he bore the solitude of seeing everything others refused to see. Every glance at a trusting face, every step through frozen snow, every choice between survival and morality became an echo in his mind. He had learned the first rule of hidden systems. The only thing worse than killing is letting the machinery erase the lives of those who trusted you. And we, generations later, inherit that same burden. Every lesson in school, every story of triumph over adversity, every comforting myth is measured against a truth someone decided you weren't ready to hear. To know the truth is to walk alone. To speak it is to risk disbelief, ridicule, and isolation. Yet there is power in this burden. Once you see the patterns, the invisible hands that shape outcomes, the careful erasures, the unspoken rules, you begin to move differently. You question instinct, habit, obedience. You measure trust like Olsen measured it in February 1889. Not by hope or faith, but by observation, logic, and understanding of human nature. The canyon still stands, silent and empty, holding its secrets beneath winter ice and sun-bleached snow. Some say the land remembers, and perhaps it does. But the human mind remembers more acutely. Each detail, each anomaly, each missing footstep is a key. The moment you notice it, you step beyond the herd of men content with stories, and into the territory of those who can act, decide, survive. This is why the truth is dangerous. It isolates you, yes, but it also awakens you. And once awakened, you cannot unsee what you have seen. If you felt that weight now, comment again with the phrase, "I remember the forgotten twice." Seal it, not for the algorithm, but for yourself. For the man who no one else could save, who returned to tell the story alone. Because in this story, survival is not just about flesh and blood, it is about awareness, perception, and the courage to carry what others cannot. The canyon is empty. The snow has melted, the wind has shifted, and yet the echo of that February in 1889 lingers. Henrik Olsen walked out alone, carrying gold and grief, leaving behind 23 names that would haunt the prairie forever. History wrote a simple story: hero, blizzard, wolves. But the truth is always more complex. What Olsen carried was not just gold, it was knowledge of human nature. He understood that trust is fragile, that desperation makes men pliable, that a single choice in the wrong place can determine life or death. And now, we inherit the same lesson. Power is rarely violent in the way you expect. It is subtle. It manipulates. It erases. It shapes without revealing itself. The greatest tragedies are not accidents, they are orchestrated, measured, and remembered only by those who see clearly. As you sit in your own world, far from the Dakota winds, you may feel the distance between past and present. But the canyon is inside every system that claims order and fairness. Every time someone bends the rules, covers a truth, or rewrites the narrative, they are tracing the same pattern Olsen stumbled upon long before we understood what obedience and survival truly meant. Now, the question falls on you. Will you walk blindly through life, following paths marked by others? Or will you see the patterns, feel the weight of knowledge, and carry it with awareness? The survivors of the prairie could not save everyone. They could not change the storm. But they bore witness, and in witnessing, they became immortal. So now, take your place among the awakened. Remember the forgotten. Speak the truths others suppress. And if this story has touched you, leave your mark. Like this video, share it with someone who questions everything, and subscribe to Fear Liturgy, where the lost are remembered, the hidden are revealed, and the truths you were never meant to hear finally speak.